With a commanding tone, Officer Johnson addressed the black woman seated in the car. "I detect something suspicious coming from this vehicle. Step out of the car," he instructed firmly. Maya, the woman in question, remained unnervingly calm, her sharp gaze assessing every detail of her surroundings. The tactical awareness that had kept her alive in combat zones around the globe was now on full display. "Officer, with all due respect, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," Maya replied steadily, her voice unwavering. "You people always think you're above the law," he retorted, slamming his hand on the car hood in an attempt to force her out. Yet Maya remained motionless, her resolve unshaken. The tension in Officer Johnson's posture heightened. "Why are you making this difficult? Do you want me to complicate your life?" "Because I excel at making people's lives difficult," he threatened, his hand hovering near his holster. He believed he had complete control and his prejudice could overshadow Maya just like it had with others before her. What he failed to realize was that Maya possessed a strength and power he could never comprehend. Around them, a few pedestrians paused, glancing over with a mix of concern and curiosity. Some whispered to one another, their expressions reflecting unease at the unfolding scene, while others instinctively reached for their phones, ready to document what they anticipated could escalate. Have you ever encountered unfair treatment from someone in authority? We want to hear your stories in the comments as we delve deeper into this narrative. If you stand against prejudice, injustice, and racism, consider subscribing to our channel for more content. Let us know where you're tuning in from below. This was just the beginning of Maya's ordeal. As the scene unfolded, the atmosphere thickened with tension, both in the air and among the onlookers, who sensed that this confrontation was about to become something much larger than a simple traffic stop. Maya Lewis navigated her silver sedan through the familiar streets of her hometown, a place she hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. At 35, she exhibited an unmistakable precision born from military discipline. Her back was straight, her eyes were constantly scanning her surroundings, and her movements were efficient and purposeful. Few knew that the quiet girl who had left after high school now led one of the Navy's most elite SEAL teams. To the casual observer, she was merely another visitor passing through. As she drove, Maya's mind drifted to the memories that clung to these streets. The old courthouse where her grandfather had worked as a janitor, the police station where she had been taught to always show respect to officers, and the community center where her mother had taught piano until the funding was cut. While the physical landscape of Milfield appeared largely unchanged, Maya could sense the invisible shifts that had taken place over the years. A growing divide was evident between those who were protected and those who were unjustly suspected, a reality that had become increasingly pronounced since her departure. Maya's thoughts were interrupted as she noticed Officer Mark Johnson's patrol car parked at the side of the road. His interest piqued as she drove by. The flashing lights lit up her rearview mirror, and she knew all too well what that meant. She had been pulled over in her hometown before, but this time was different. She was back to visit her aunt after completing a classified operation overseas, finally enjoying 3 weeks of hard-earned leave after months of deployment. With a practiced precision honed through years of training, Maya signaled and pulled over, reaching for her registration and license. She followed the rules as always. As Officer Johnson approached, his hand rested on his holster, a gesture that was unnecessary for a routine traffic stop. "License and registration," he demanded, bypassing the customary explanation for why he had pulled her over. "May I ask what the violation was, officer?" Maya replied, her voice steady yet firm, embodying a calm authority that surprised even her. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," he asserted, despite the fact that Maya had come to a complete stop, counting the required 3 seconds before proceeding. She handed over her documents without argument. Years of military strategy taught her that it was wiser to choose her battles carefully. Officer Johnson scrutinized her license with growing suspicion. "You're not from around here anymore, just visiting family, right?" "I'm on leave," she clarified, maintaining her composure. His eyes narrowed as he shone his flashlight through her windows, scanning the pristine interior of her vehicle. There was nothing to find and nothing to hide. "There is no contraband in my vehicle, Officer Johnson," she stated calmly, noting his name badge. I know my rights." As he stepped closer, his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Your kind always think you know your rights, acting smart with your fancy words," he said, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. "But out here I decide who has rights. I decide who goes home and who goes to jail tonight." A flicker of anger flashed in Officer Johnson's eyes at being challenged, especially by someone who wasn't intimidated by his presence. "Exit the vehicle now," he ordered, his tone escalating as a second patrol car approached. He leaned in close, just within earshot, and hissed, "I've dealt with plenty of uppity ones like you. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd shown some respect." Maya complied with deliberate precision, her hands remaining visible, following the same protocol she had practiced in hostile territories worldwide. Never give anyone a reason to perceive a threat. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," he commanded, his voice rising. As she complied, her mind raced with the tactical knowledge acquired over 12 years of combat training. She stood balanced and controlled, breathing steadily. Just then, Johnson bumped into her, then staggered back dramatically, clutching his face. "She hit me," he shouted toward his approaching colleague, his voice filled with urgency. "Officer, I need backup." Maya hadn't moved an inch. Her hands remained spread on the hood of her car, clearly visible to the dashboard camera. "I did not touch you, Officer Johnson," she asserted calmly, ensuring the cameras captured her words. "Shut up!" Johnson snarled, pressing her roughly against the vehicle. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer." As the handcuffs tightened around her wrists, Maya's mind didn't dwell on injustice or anger. Instead, it focused on calculating her next move, observing every detail around her, planning her response. With the tension escalating, bystanders began to gather, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief, some shaking their heads while others whispered amongst themselves about what they were witnessing. Have you ever faced abuse of power? What would you have done in Maya's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. This was just the beginning of a fight that would reveal deep-rooted issues within the system. In this moment, Maya realized she was not just battling for herself, she would be fighting against a system that had long allowed such abuses to flourish. Maya found herself in a familiar yet unnerving environment as she was escorted into the Milfield Police Station. The walls were still painted a faded blue, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the American flag hung limply in the corner, just as she remembered from her teenage years. But this time she was not a visitor. She was a suspect, handcuffed and facing a system that had always favored authority over justice. The officers on duty exchanged glances as they observed Maya's composed demeanor. Most individuals in her position would likely be panicking, but Maya was far from ordinary. Her military training kicked in, and she began to methodically assess her surroundings. She noted the layout of the room, the locations of the booking stations, and the security cameras, particularly the one with a blind spot near the water cooler. Her analytical mind cataloged every detail, preparing her for the fight ahead. As Officer Johnson strutted into the booking area, his face already flushed from the assault, he announced with a sense of pride, "Got a live one here." Assaulted an officer during a routine stop. Sergeant Miller, who had been sitting behind a desk, looked up from his paperwork, his expression shifting from boredom to mild discomfort as he took in the sight of Maya standing tall despite her cuffs. "She hit you?" he asked, a hint of skepticism creeping into his voice. "Doesn't look the type," Miller remarked, eyeing her with curiosity. "Caught her with drugs too. Just a regular traffic stop that turned violent. I had to use considerable restraint to bring her in without escalating the situation," Johnson continued, embellishing the story with each word. Maya remained silent, her training keeping her poised and focused. Memories of Navy SEAL Hell Week flashed through her mind, standing for hours in freezing water while instructors tried to break her spirit. "This isn't pain, this is just discomfort, and discomfort is temporary," she recalled. As Johnson's narrative grew more theatrical, Maya's resolve strengthened. She wouldn't allow herself to be a victim in this situation. She was determined to unravel the web of lies being spun around her. After what felt like an eternity, Officer Diaz, a younger officer who had been observing from the sidelines, glanced between Johnson and Maya. He noticed the calmness in her posture and the lack of any signs of struggle. Wait a minute, he thought, sensing something was off. Johnson disappeared for 30 minutes, returning triumphantly with a small plastic bag that rattled ominously. Look what I found hidden in her vehicle, he proclaimed, slapping the bag onto the booking desk. Inside were pills, which he claimed were illegal prescription drugs. Maya's eyes narrowed as she processed the implications. She had meticulously maintained her car since the day she bought it. Those pills were not hers. Illegal prescription drugs, Johnson repeated, explaining her erratic behavior. Sergeant Miller frowned slightly, beginning to question the validity of Johnson's claims. You searched the vehicle after the assault? Had probable cause? He inquired, skepticism evident in his tone. Smelled something suspicious, Johnson replied too quickly, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. As they photographed and fingerprinted Maya, Officer Diaz observed her closely. He noted how she followed instructions with mechanical precision, her military posture unwavering even in handcuffs. You can make your phone call, he said quietly, pulling her aside to avoid Johnson's earshot. Most people in her position would likely call family or a lawyer, but Maya had other plans. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her voice clipped and precise. Lieutenant Commander Lewis reporting a delay in scheduled check-in. Location, Milfield Municipal Station. Situation, Charlie, she stated, using military code that only someone familiar with her background would understand. Diaz's eyes widened in realization. She was not just any civilian. Throughout the booking process, Maya endured a barrage of disrespectful remarks from the officers. Stand here, sweetheart, and smile for the camera, honey, were met with her unwavering silence. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, cataloging names and behaviors, analyzing their reactions. 2 hours later, Jeremy Wells, her overworked public defender, sat across from her in a dimly lit consultation room, his tie stained and his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Look, Miss Lewis. The situation is quite straightforward, he began, barely skimming her file. You've got no priors, which is good, but assaulting an officer is serious. Add drug possession charges. I didn't assault anyone, Maya interrupted, her voice steady. And those drugs were planted. Wells had heard similar claims before from guilty clients and innocent ones alike. Officer Johnson has documented injuries, he countered, his tone exasperated. His report states you became combative during a routine traffic stop. His report is false, Maya replied firmly. I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do. Miss Lewis, you need to understand the reality here. It's your word against a police officer's. Who do you think a jury in this town will believe? He said, frustration evident. Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. Mr. Wells, I understand reality better than most. I've spent my career assessing threats and calculating odds. I'm not accepting a plea deal. As Wells left, frustrated, Maya began mentally mapping the case against her, identifying every inconsistency and procedural flaw. This was no longer just about defending herself. It was about exposing a system that had long allowed such corruption to thrive. Outside the consultation room, Officer Johnson sat with Assistant District Attorney Karen Larson, painting a narrative of a dangerous, unstable woman who had attacked him without provocation. She was definitely on something, he insisted, embellishing his story with false bravado. In the meantime, Maya stood resolute, ready to take on the fight against not only her false accusations, but the system that had allowed Officer Johnson's abuse of power to go unchecked for far too long. As she prepared for the battles ahead, she felt a growing determination to not just clear her name, but to seek justice for all those who had suffered at the hands of corrupt authority. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an abuse of power? Share your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button for more updates on Maya's journey. Join us at Change Weavers as we uncover the truth. The atmosphere in the Milfield Police Station was thick with tension as Maya was brought in, her wrists still restrained by handcuffs. The familiar faded blue walls and flickering fluorescent lights seemed more oppressive than ever. She felt the weight of judgment in the eyes of the officers around her, yet she remained composed. This wasn't her first encounter with authority, but it was certainly her most critical. As Officer Johnson strutted in, his face still red from the confrontation, he announced, "I've got a live one here. She assaulted me during a routine traffic stop." His tone carried a mixture of triumph and bravado, clearly relishing the attention he received from his colleagues. Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "She hit you?" he asked, skepticism evident in his voice. The other officers exchanged glances, some whispering among themselves, unsure of what to make of the situation unfolding before them. "Doesn't look like the type," Miller added, studying Maya's unyielding posture. "She's a serious threat," Johnson continued, embellishing his account. "Caught her with drugs, too. Just a routine stop that turned violent. I had to use considerable restraint to bring her in without escalating the situation." His bravado was palpable, but Maya could see the cracks forming in his facade. Maya remained silent, her military training kicking in. She had learned long ago to control her emotions, to remain focused and observant even in the most chaotic situations. She remembered her instructors shouting during training, "This isn't pain, this is just discomfort, and discomfort is temporary." That lesson resonated with her now as she prepared for the battle ahead. As Officer Johnson continued to spin his tale, Maya's resolve only strengthened. She wouldn't allow him to manipulate the narrative or play the victim. She was determined to reclaim her story. After a lengthy wait, Johnson returned with a small plastic bag that rattled ominously. "Look what I found hidden in her vehicle," he said, dropping the bag onto the booking desk. Inside were pills, which he claimed were illegal prescription drugs. Maya's heart raced as she recognized the gravity of the situation. She had meticulously maintained her car. Those pills had not been there before. "Illegal prescription drugs," Johnson repeated, his tone dripping with satisfaction. Sergeant Miller frowned slightly, beginning to question the validity of Johnson's claims. "You searched the vehicle after the supposed assault? Had probable cause?" he asked, his skepticism growing. "Smelled something suspicious," Johnson replied too quickly, his defensiveness evident. As they photographed and fingerprinted Maya, Officer Diaz, the younger officer who had been observing, noticed the contrast between Maya's calm demeanor and Johnson's aggressive posturing. Maya followed instructions with mechanical precision, not a hint of fear or anxiety visible on her face. "You can make your phone call now," Diaz said quietly, pulling her aside. While most people in her position would likely call family or a lawyer, Maya had a different plan. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her voice steady and precise. "Lieutenant Commander Lewis reporting a delay in scheduled check-in. Location, Milfield Municipal Station. Situation, Charlie." She used military code that would resonate with her superiors, a signal that she was in trouble but would handle it. Diaz's eyes widened as he realized the weight of her words. He understood she was not just any civilian, she was a military officer, and that changed everything. Throughout the booking process, Maya endured a barrage of disrespectful comments from the officers. "Stand here, sweetheart, and smile for the camera, honey," were met with her unwavering silence. Her eyes scanned the faces around her, cataloging names and behaviors, analyzing their reactions to gather information for her defense. 2 hours later, Jeremy Wells, her public defender, entered the consultation room, looking disheveled and overwhelmed. "Look, Miss Lewis, the situation is quite straightforward," he began, barely glancing at her file. "You've got no priors, which is good, but assaulting an officer is serious. Add drug possession charges." "I didn't assault anyone," Maya interrupted, her voice firm. "And those drugs were planted." Wells sighed, a mixture of frustration and fatigue in his expression. "Officer Johnson has documented injuries," he countered, his tone weary. "His report states you became combative during a routine traffic stop." "His report is false," Maya replied, unwavering. I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do. Miss Lewis, you need to understand the reality here. It's your word against a police officer's. Who do you think a jury in this town will believe?" he said, exasperation creeping into his voice. Maya leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "Mr. Wells, I understand reality better than most. I've spent my career assessing threats and calculating odds. I'm not accepting a plea deal." As Wells left, frustrated, Maya began mentally mapping the case against her, identifying every inconsistency and procedural flaw. This was no longer just about defending herself. It was about exposing a system that had long allowed such corruption to thrive. In the coming days, as Maya prepared for the battles ahead, she felt a growing determination to not just clear her name, but to seek justice for all those who had suffered at the hands of corrupt authority. She was ready to fight for herself and for everyone else who had been silenced. Have you ever witnessed or experienced abuse of power? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates on Maya's journey. Join us at Change Weavers as we uncover the truth. As Maya sat in the dingy consultation room, the fluorescent lights flickering above her, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Across the table sat Jeremy Wells, her public defender, who looked weary and overwhelmed, his tie slightly askew and his eyes red from a lack of sleep. The smudged paperwork in front of him was a stark reminder of the challenges they faced. "Look, Miss Lewis, the situation is quite straightforward," he began, rubbing his temples. "You've got no prior offenses, which is good, but assaulting an officer is serious business. If the DA decides to pursue this, it could lead to significant consequences for you. Add in the drugs they claim to have found, and we're looking at a tough battle." "I didn't assault anyone," Maya interjected firmly, her voice steady. "And those drugs were planted in my vehicle. This is a setup, and I intend to fight it." Wells sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation evident in his expression. "I understand you feel that way, but Officer Johnson has documented injuries. His report states you became combative during a routine traffic stop. It's your word against his, and you have to consider that." "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do," Maya replied, her determination unwavering. Years of military training had taught her to stand her ground, and she wasn't about to let this moment define her. "Miss Lewis, you need to understand the reality here," he stressed, leaning forward. "It's your word against a police officer's, and juries tend to side with law enforcement." Maya leaned back, crossing her arms. "Mr. Wells, I understand reality better than most. I've spent my career assessing threats and calculating odds. I won't accept a plea deal that implies guilt for something I didn't do." As Wells left, visibly frustrated with Maya's refusal to compromise, she took a deep breath, her mind racing. She needed to take control of her situation. She began mentally mapping out the case against her, identifying every inconsistency and potential flaw in Officer Johnson's narrative. This was no longer just about her, it was about exposing the corruption that had led to her unjust arrest. A few days later, Maya found herself back at the station for a pre-trial hearing. The atmosphere was charged with tension as she walked through the familiar halls, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the officers on her, some filled with disdain, others with curiosity. She was determined to show them that she was not a victim, but a warrior. In the courtroom, the judge presided with a stern demeanor, and Officer Johnson took the stand first. He recounted the events of that fateful day with rehearsed confidence, his voice steady as he described a dangerous encounter with Maya. He painted a picture of a routine traffic stop that had escalated into chaos, complete with exaggerated gestures and a dramatic flair. "Officer Johnson, please describe the events of yesterday afternoon," the prosecutor prompted, leaning forward eagerly. "I pulled over the defendant for running a stop sign," Johnson recounted, his tone filled with righteous indignation. "But as soon as I approached the vehicle, I could tell something was off. When I asked her to exit, she became aggressive." Maya watched him closely, her eyes narrowing as he continued his fabricated tale. The familiar script unfolded, and she felt a surge of anger at the injustice being served to her. She was determined to counter his claims. When it was finally Maya's turn to take the stand, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. This was her moment to reclaim her story. She straightened her posture and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I am not a flight risk. I have served my country honorably for 12 years, and continue to do so. I have no criminal record. The charges against me are fabricated and I will prove it." The prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, the defendant assaulted an officer and was found with illegal prescription medication. The state requests bail to be set at." Maya's heart raced as she prepared to speak again. "Your Honor, I have ties to this community. I am a decorated officer, and my commanding officer can verify my status if necessary." The judge studied her with renewed interest, clearly taken aback by her composure and determination. "What branch of the military, Miss Lewis?" he asked. "Navy, Your Honor," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Current rank?" "Lieutenant Commander, Your Honor." The courtroom buzzed with surprise, and Maya could see the shift in the judge's demeanor. Johnson shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he had underestimated her. "Bail is set at $5,000. Next case," the judge declared, his gavel striking down decisively. Maya felt a rush of relief as she stepped down from the stand, knowing she had made an impact. As she left the courtroom, Maya's heart swelled with hope. She was not just fighting for her own freedom, she was fighting for justice. She vowed to expose the truth and hold Officer Johnson accountable for his actions. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight for your truth? Share your experiences in the comments and subscribe to our channel for more updates on Maya's journey. Join us at Change Weavers as we strive to uncover and confront injustice. After her victory in court, Maya returned to her motel room, the walls adorned with a meticulous investigation board that resembled a military intelligence briefing. Case files, timelines, and connections were laid out with precision, reflecting the skills she had honed over years of service. The faint hum of the air conditioning filled the silence as she focused on the task at hand, gathering evidence to expose Officer Johnson's corruption. Maya had always excelled in intelligence-gathering exercises during her SEAL training, where the smallest details could mean the difference between success and failure. Now she applied those skills to her current situation. Determined to dismantle the web of deceit that had ensnared her, she began to compile information on Officer Johnson, his arrest records, and any patterns of misconduct that could corroborate her claims. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. 3 quick taps, exactly as arranged. Maya opened the door to find Officer Diaz standing outside, still in his uniform but clearly off duty. His demeanor was nervous, and he glanced over his shoulder as if worried about being seen. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, stepping inside. "But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something doesn't feel right." "Yet here you are," Maya replied calmly, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Because you know something's off about this whole situation." Diaz looked around the room, taking in the organized investigation board with wide eyes. "You're really military, aren't you?" Johnson said. "You made that up." "Lieutenant Commander Lewis," she confirmed, her voice steady. "Look, I don't know what's happening, but Johnson's arrest reports, they follow a pattern," Diaz said hesitantly. "They're always the same. Predominantly minority suspects. Traffic stops that escalate into searches. Drugs conveniently found in vehicles. It's like he's running a playbook." Maya's mind raced as she connected the dots. "Last month I saw him plant evidence in a suspect's car. When I asked about it, Sergeant Miller pulled me aside and told me to forget what I saw if I wanted to keep my job." The final piece clicked into place. Miller's discomfort at the station wasn't just uncertainty, it was complicity. "Diaz, I need you to trust me." "I have a plan," Maya said, her resolve firming. Diaz nodded, his expression serious. "What do you need from me?" "I need any records you can get your hands on. Arrest histories, body cam footage, anything that can support my case," she instructed. "If Johnson's been running this scheme, we need to expose it." As Diaz pulled a USB drive from his pocket, he slid it across the table. "I made copies before they could disappear. It contains departmental records and footage that never made it into evidence. Maya took the drive, her heart racing with anticipation. She quickly plugged it into her laptop, scanning through the files. The data revealed a troubling pattern. 17 arrests in the past year, all with striking similarities. Most of the suspects were from minority backgrounds, and the charges against them often vanished in exchange for guilty pleas to lesser offenses. It was clear that Officer Johnson was not just a rogue cop. He was part of a larger operation. As she sifted through the evidence, Maya's eyes narrowed at a particular file. It contained details of Marcus Reynolds, the owner of several nightclubs on the north side of town, rumored to be a supplier for half the county. His name appeared in connection with Johnson's arrests, suggesting a deeper corruption involving drug distribution and law enforcement collusion. "This goes beyond Johnson," Maya murmured, her mind racing. "Reynolds is paying him off. We need to dig deeper." Over the following days, Maya worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle. She discovered a pattern of intimidation and corruption that extended beyond Johnson to parts of the police department itself. Sergeant Miller's signature appeared on multiple questionable evidence logs, each one burying procedural violations that would expose the scheme. As dawn broke one morning, Maya placed a final photo on her board, an image of Sergeant Miller meeting with Reynolds behind a closed restaurant, captured by a local blogger who had assumed he was documenting a simple meeting. This was the evidence that could link the corrupt officers to their criminal activities. Maya's phone buzzed, and she saw a text from her commanding officer, Captain Hargrove, asking for an update. She quickly typed back, detailing her findings and expressing her concerns about the growing corruption within the Milfield Police Force. Later that day, Hargrove arrived at the motel, his tailored civilian suit contrasting sharply with the surroundings. As he stepped inside, he surveyed the investigation board with appreciation. "I didn't expect to see you in person, Captain," Maya said, a hint of relief washing over her. "When one of my best officers gets arrested on bogus charges, I make exceptions to protocol," he replied. Hargrove placed a classified folder on the table, his expression serious. "Your message triggered some inquiries. Turns out Officer Johnson has pinged on federal radar before." Maya's heart raced as she opened the folder, scanning through the documents that detailed Johnson's questionable financial activities and connections to known drug operations. This was the ammunition they needed to take him down. "There's someone else you should meet," Hargrove said, glancing at his watch. "Right on schedule." As if on cue, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the JAG Corps entered the room, her uniform crisp and professional. "Commander Lewis," she greeted, nodding with respect. "I've reviewed your case. It's a textbook frame-up, but they've made mistakes, multiple procedural violations, and inconsistencies in Officer Johnson's testimony." With Hargrove and Chen's support, Maya felt a surge of hope. Together they would craft a plan not only to defend her, but to expose the systemic corruption that had plagued Milfield for too long. "Let's not just aim for a dismissal," Maya stated, her determination unwavering. "We need to ensure Johnson and his accomplices face justice. This is bigger than just me." As they strategized, Maya felt a newfound sense of purpose. She was ready to fight, not just for herself, but for all the victims who had suffered under the weight of corruption and abuse of power. Have you ever encountered a situation where you had to stand up against injustice? Share your experiences in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more updates on Maya's journey. Join us at Change Weavers as we work to uncover and confront the truth. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Maya stood outside the Milfield County Courthouse, its imposing structure a testament to the justice system she was about to challenge. She wore a crisp navy blue suit, her posture reflecting the military discipline that had become second nature to her. Beside her stood Captain Hargrove and Lieutenant Commander Chen, their presence a silent affirmation of her credibility. "Are you ready?" Chen asked, her voice calm but determined. Maya nodded, her eyes focused on the courthouse entrance. "I've been ready since the moment Johnson put those handcuffs on me." Inside, Courtroom 3 buzzed with activity. Assistant District Attorney Karen Larson shuffled through her papers, her confidence wavering as she reviewed the conflicting evidence that had been presented to her earlier that morning. Judge Raymond Harmon entered, his expression betraying nothing as he surveyed the room. Officer Johnson sat near the front, his previously smug demeanor replaced by a hint of uncertainty. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the proceedings began. As Maya took her seat at the defense table, she felt a sense of calm determination wash over her. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore, it was about exposing a system that had failed too many before her. Officer Johnson was called to the stand first, his testimony beginning with the same rehearsed confidence he had displayed in previous cases. "I pulled over the defendant for running a stop sign," he stated, his voice steady. "As I approached the vehicle, I could tell something was off. When I asked her to exit, she became aggressive and struck me without provocation." Maya watched him carefully, noting the subtle shifts in his posture, the slight tremor in his hand as he demonstrated the alleged assault. She had seen enough combat to recognize fear, and Johnson was afraid. When it was Chen's turn to cross-examine, she approached with calculated precision. "Officer Johnson, you testified that Commander Lewis struck you during this encounter. Did you seek medical attention for these injuries?" Johnson hesitated. "No, ma'am. I've been trained to handle worse." "And this alleged fighting technique? Have you encountered it before?" "Not specifically, no," he admitted, shifting uncomfortably. Chen nodded, her expression neutral. "Officer Johnson, are you aware that the defendant is a decorated Navy SEAL with extensive combat experience?" The courtroom fell silent as Johnson's eyes widened. "I was not aware of that. And yet, despite her training, you claim she chose to assault you during a routine traffic stop, in full view of your dashboard camera." Chen continued, her tone measured. "That's correct," Johnson replied, less confidently. "Let's review that footage, shall we?" Chen requested, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present Exhibit A." As the courtroom screen flickered to life, the footage played, showing Maya's car pulled over, her hands visible on the steering wheel. The audio was clear, capturing every word of their exchange. Then came the moment when Johnson claimed she had struck him, but the video showed her hands remaining on the hood of the car, never moving, while Johnson dramatically staggered backward. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Johnson's face paled as he watched the evidence contradicting his testimony unfold before everyone's eyes. "Officer Johnson," Chen continued, "would you care to explain the discrepancy between your testimony and what we just witnessed?" Before he could respond, Chen produced another piece of evidence. "Your Honor, the defense would also like to present Exhibit B, a recording made by Commander Lewis during a subsequent encounter with Officer Johnson outside this very courthouse." The audio played, Johnson's voice filling the room. "You think that matters? I've put away people a lot smarter than you. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be lucky if you're just dishonorably discharged. I know people in this town, I know judges, prosecutors. This is my territory." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Harmon's face darkened as he listened to the threats. "Order," he commanded, silencing the room. Chen wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting Officer Johnson has engaged in a pattern of similar behavior, targeting minority suspects and planting evidence to secure convictions." She presented the files Diaz had provided, outlining the 17 cases with striking similarities. "Objection," Larson called out, her voice strained. "This goes beyond the scope of the current case."
"Your Honor," Maya interjected, rising to her feet, "these cases demonstrate a pattern of misconduct that directly relates to my arrest. I'm not the only victim here."
Judge Harmon considered for a moment, then nodded. "Objection overruled. Continue, Commander Lewis." Maya stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, what happened to me is part of a larger issue. Officer Johnson has abused his power repeatedly, targeting individuals he believed couldn't fight back. Today I stand not just for myself, but for every person who has been silenced by this corruption." As she spoke, Officer Diaz entered the courtroom, accompanied by 2 FBI agents. Their presence sent a ripple of tension through the room. Johnson's face drained of color as he realized the extent of the investigation against him. "Your Honor," one of the agents announced, "we have a federal warrant for the arrest of Officer Blake Johnson on charges of evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." Judge Harmon's gavel came down with finality. "This case is dismissed. Officer Johnson, you are remanded into federal custody." As Johnson was led away in handcuffs, Maya felt a sense of vindication wash over her. She had faced injustice and fought back with truth and determination. The system that had protected corrupt officers like Johnson was beginning to crumble, and she had played a part in that change. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, eager to hear from the woman who had exposed corruption within the Milfield Police Department. Maya stood tall, flanked by her supporters, ready to share her story and inspire others to fight for justice. Have you ever stood up against a system that seemed too powerful to challenge? Share your stories of resilience and courage in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Change Weavers for more inspiring stories of individuals making a difference in their communities. Together, we can create meaningful change. The atmosphere outside the Milfield County Courthouse was electric, with reporters clamoring for interviews and onlookers buzzing with excitement. Maya stood among her supporters, her heart racing as she processed the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. The dismissal of her case and the arrest of Officer Johnson felt surreal, yet she was acutely aware that this victory was just the beginning. As cameras flashed and microphones were thrust in her direction, Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me through this ordeal," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Today isn't just a victory for me, it's a victory for everyone who has ever faced injustice at the hands of those in power. We must hold those who abuse their authority accountable." The crowd erupted in applause, and Maya felt a swell of pride. It was a moment she had dreamed of since the day she was wrongfully accused. Yet, amidst the celebration, she knew that the fight for justice was far from over. The systemic issues that allowed Officer Johnson to operate unchecked still existed, and she was determined to address them. In the days following the hearing, Maya became a beacon of hope for the community. She was invited to speak at local events, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. Each time she spoke, she saw the faces of those who had suffered similar experiences, and it fueled her passion to advocate for change. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Milfield Police Department gained momentum. Federal agents delved deeper into Officer Johnson's activities, uncovering a network of corruption that extended beyond just him. As details emerged, it became clear that several officers had been complicit in the misconduct, and the community's trust in law enforcement was shattered. Maya received a call from Captain Hargrove one afternoon, his tone serious yet hopeful. "Maya, the federal investigation has turned up significant evidence against not only Johnson but also Sergeant Miller and a few others. They're facing serious charges, and it looks like the department will undergo major reforms." "That's great news, Captain," Maya replied, her heart racing. "But what about the victims who suffered because of their actions? Will they get justice too?" "Absolutely," Hargrove assured her. "We're working on ensuring that all affected individuals receive the support they need, and will introduce new policies to prevent this kind of abuse in the future." Maya felt a surge of relief. The wheels of justice were finally turning, and it seemed that her fight had sparked a larger movement for accountability. She continued her advocacy work, collaborating with local organizations to create programs aimed at educating citizens about their rights and the importance of speaking out against injustice. One evening, as she prepared for a community meeting, Maya received a surprise visit from Officer Diaz. He entered her motel room, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on his face. "Commander Lewis," he began, "I wanted to thank you personally. You gave me the courage to speak up about what I witnessed, and because of you, I'm now testifying against Johnson and the others." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his bravery. "You did the right thing, Diaz. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it's against your own colleagues." As they discussed the upcoming testimony, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the fight for justice extended beyond her own case. It was about creating a safer and more equitable community for everyone. On the day of Diaz's testimony, the courtroom was packed with supporters, community members, and media. Maya sat in the front row, her heart pounding as she watched Diaz take the stand. His testimony was powerful and compelling, detailing the corruption he had witnessed and the fear that had kept him silent for so long. Officer Johnson took advantage of his position, Diaz stated, his voice strong despite the weight of the moment. He targeted people who he believed wouldn't fight back. I was scared, but I realized that if I didn't speak up, I would be complicit in his actions. Maya watched as the jury listened intently, the gravity of his words resonating in the room. She felt a sense of solidarity with Diaz and all the others who would come forward to share their stories. Their collective voices were a force for change. In the following weeks, the fallout from the investigation continued. Officer Johnson was indicted on multiple charges, and Sergeant Miller was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. The Milfield Police Department announced a series of reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability, including the implementation of community oversight committees. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The fight against injustice had taken her on an unexpected journey, but it had also awakened a passion within her to advocate for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She knew that change was possible, and her story had become a catalyst for that change. As she stood before a crowd once more, sharing her journey and encouraging others to stand up against injustice, Maya felt a profound sense of purpose. "We have the power to create change," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Together, we can build a future where justice prevails, and everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Have you ever felt inspired to make a difference in your community? Share your stories of resilience and empowerment in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Change Weavers for more stories of individuals fighting for justice and creating positive change. Together we can weave a brighter future.